Chapter 2 Kentwood. My sister Sandra did not have her official driver's license when we used to go driving together. She at the wheel and me riding shotgun, cracking gum, and letting the wind blow through my hair. We were country girls, through and through. In those days, in rural places, it was common to have 12, 13, and 14 years old tooling around back roads and even town streets in their daddy's cars. When Sandra was about 15, Mama sent her to Kentwood to get some groceries, and as usual, I was her wing woman. Sandra was quite responsible and a good driver for a 15-year-old, but that day she hit another car, and not just any car either. A gleaming Cadillac with a boat hooked up to back of it. Neither of us was hurt, but when Daddy found out, he was livid. You couldn't have hit a beat up old Ford pickup, could you? He stormed and sputtered. No, you had to hit a Cadillac with a boat hookup. Sandra was in the doghouse forever. Daddy never forgot that wreck. Countless times before Sandra was about to step out the door and go someplace, he would throw in his 2 cents. Sandra, be careful. Watch what you're doing. I don't want you to go hitting another Cadillac now. You take care of yourself because I don't want to lose you. With everything that happened in my life after I became an adult and a mother, I'm grateful my heart was not hardened to those beautiful times. Although I doubt beautiful is the word my daddy would have used at that time. Expensive was more like it. Now that Sandra is gone, these memories bring a healing and comfort, tears and laughter. I can see her face when she hit that Cadillac. When the hard moments and hours of grief threatened to overtake me, these snapshots from our lives together give me strength. From Malta to Louisiana. Kentwood, Louisiana is not exactly an exotic destination. There's basically the Kentwood Cafe, Connie's Jewelries, a bunch of dollar stores, and a Sonic drive-in, the hub of the community. Everybody knows everybody's for generations, and my daddy's people have been in the area as far as back as anyone can remember. But on my mama's side, the family tree is a little more colorful and glamorous. Her father, my grandfather, was Anthony Bertolli, who came from the island of Malta. Malta is a small, densely populated nation consisting of 7 islands in the Mediterranean Sea. It lies south of Sicily, east of Tunisia, and north of Libya, in case you were curious. Now you'll know the answer next time you're on a TV quiz show. Anthony Portelli came to England in the 1920s, married a British girl, and changed his name to Portel. The Portels had 2 daughters, Joanne, my aunt, and Lillian, my mother. Mama grew up in London, a city she loved and missed until the day she died. I can remember her telling me stories of how she and her family survived the Blitz. In September 1940, the Nazis began their sustained bombing of the United Kingdom by blasting my mother's hometown for 57 nights in a row. She had a bit of stubborn streak, and one night during the Blitz, she didn't want to go to their raid shelter across the street from her house. It was a nasty, dirty, smelly place, she said, and she refused. She refused to join her parents and sister, despite their pleading with her to come. It wasn't a good night to test fate. As it turned out, the shelling was so close, the roof of their house was blown right off. Mama grabbed her beloved dog and ran screaming across the street, with her father yelling, "Run, Lil, run." She cut her feet running on the broken glass all over the ground, but she made it to the air raid shelter, safe and sound. It must have been soon after that when my parents met. Daddy was in the United States Army, serving his country overseas during the World War II. There were dances in London for the soldiers, and at one such dance, Barney Bridges and Lillian Bortell first laid eyes on each other. Mama was lovely, with her father's dark Maltese coloring, and she just sparkled with fun. Daddy was very handsome too, but he also had an advantage over the other American soldiers. As a driver for the U.S. generals, he had access to some goodies that must have seemed very appealing during the heavy rationing of the day. Essentially, he wooed my mother with candy and cheese, which was apparently effective because she agreed to marry him. In Kentwood, a local paper ran a photo of my mother with her glossy brown hair and her stylish London clothes. It was notable on the home front that a local dairyman was bringing home a foreign beauty from across the ocean. Thousands of young brides from Europe and Asia streamed into America after the war ended. But in rural Louisiana, this was a bit of a first. Some of those brides arrived on these shores pregnant, and their new American husbands were no shows. But Barney Bridges was waiting on the New Orleans for his bride to fly from the New York City. He was eager to bring his Lillian home. Daddy was bragged to Mama about all the land his family owned, hundreds of acres of Louisiana soil, but as she was to discover in short order, a landowner in England is a far sight from a southern farmer. There were no lush, manicured lawns in Panicpa parish, and there certainly was no genteel country state. There were, however, dirt roads, snakes, and unrelenting heat. The new Mrs. Lynne Bridges had some adjusting to do. Starting immediately, Mama and Daddy drove more than an hour through dark, swampy terrain on their way home from the airport. There are all over lights. There, where are all the lights? She wondered out loud. A city of girl to her core. Mama muttered the life she had in London, where she could walk down the street every day for fresh bread and produce. Southern cooking, on the other hand, mandates that everything, and I do mean everything, is fried within an inch of its life. She recalled with a shudder, once how their in-laws would cook beans outside in a huge vat, adding chunks of lard by the subtle spoonful. To Mama, she may as well have been a million miles from all that was comfortable and dear. She homesick for her parents, her sister, and her country. The poor thing cried every night, and Daddy was at his wits' end trying to make her happy. Inside, she was always fashionable London lady, yet outwardly she had to play the role of a farmer's wife, stuck on stuck in the sticks. But she made it. Mama was married in love and resilient, and eventually she was able to walk in step with the strange rhythms of life of her surroundings. She even enjoyed some aspects of her rural existence, such as feeding the adorable calves. Of course, she always wore the most attractive Wellingtons, what English call rubber boots, money could buy. Homesick or not, she was determined to make his new life work, and in 1947 She had another reason to sink her roots more deeply into American earth. My sister Sandra was born, followed 4 years later by my brother Barry, and then, after 4 more years, me and the baby of the family. Years later, when I was in high school, our family traveled to England to visit relatives there. During the trip, I met Aunt Joanne and Uncle Archie Walmore for the first time and stayed at their lovely home. I think it was also the first time that I began to grasp just what my mama was missing to so dearly on the other side of the ocean. I remember being full of I remember being full of admiration of British way of life, sitting in the Woodmore garden, having tea with my relatives. I gathered that the English valued education and travel, and they felt travel was indeed an integral part of one's education. Jamie Lynne and I in London having coffee at tea time. We won overseas from the European Kids' Choice Awards. Mama as a beautiful war bride. Some of my mother's relatives were accomplished musicians, and one great uncle owned a book binding company. Engraved in my mind is how quiet and beautiful the great uncle's garden was as we had tea amid his flowers and shrubbery. Years later, I would pattern the garden of my home based on my memory of that afternoon with a charming English book binder, my mother's uncle, someone to watch over. When Sandra was 12, I was just 4. I would jump on her back and she would head down to the woods and his wonderful creek that was little something out of Mark Twain novel. Twain novel. Well, maybe the creek was a little smaller and less grand than Mississippi, but in my childhood imagination it was just as magnificent. A picture of the 3 siblings at a outing. I wasn't very happy. Sonny probably pinched me. We'd be joined by a dozen or so of our cousins, who were all more or less Sandra's age. They built rafts with hammers and nails, and I would help my own little way. There was a huge tree with massive, girdled limbs that branched across the water, and we would climb all over it, back and forth. There were snakes everywhere, but Sandra kept a close eye out for them and a close watch on me until the day she died. Sandra was someone to watch over me. Many of my way Many of you may feel this way about your sisters, but I think that Sandra and I had a singular bond of closeness. One of my earliest memories in Sandra playing dolls with her friends, I was her living doll to dress and buzz, and they had to make do with plain plastic dolls. My big sister was so devoted, so devoted, she even brought me along on a number of her dates. She was a beautiful teenager with hazel eyes and a heart-melting smile, and she had her share of suitors, some of whom were none too pleased and having to share Sandra with likes of me. I just want Lynne to come along with us tonight, that's all. I heard her plead in a whisper to one young man as I sat on the back seat of his car. Who knows, maybe she needed a chaperone on those nights, and I was certainly a less daunting guardian than Mama or Daddy would have been. But I truly think she just wanted me nearby because we were two pears in a pod. Family matters. The dairy was a wonderful place to raise children. Daddy got up at 3:30 or 4:30 to milk the cows, and by 6:45 there was a big country breakfast on the table, with everyone sitting down to homemade biscuits, eggs, bacon, and cream from the top of the milk pail for coffee. There was no variation to this morning ritual. In the summer, we would run outside and build rafts for the creek and play in three houses. There were moccasins and rattlesnakes galore. But do you think my parents ever told us to wear shoes? Huckfin had nothing on us. There were black widow spiders too. My grandpa Bridges was bitten once, but I don't want to tell you where. Let's just say it's a piece of family lore and it's best left to the imagination. I loved riding horses. My favorite horse was called Wishbone because my mother, whom we all call Sonny, wished on a turkey bone at a Christmas for a horse. Sonny was just 4 years older than me, so he and I spent hours together playing and riding. Wisdom and playing and riding wisdom. After a good hard day of play, we'd come in for supper and watch the Andy Griffin show together. Mama was the heartbeat of our home. It was immaculate, though we did vacuum every single day. Um, it, it was immaculate, though we felt comfortable enough to put our feet up, so to speak, but the woman did vacuum every single day. We would tease her about her fastidiousness because she even had a habit of clearing off the table before we were all finished eating. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to rush you up. She would say it so sweetly in her British accent. Can I get you something else? She liked things to be pretty but orderly. Orderly. Everything was in its place. When she was in housework mode, she could give the Energizer Bunny a run for his money. My friends owed and oh, my friends owed at how she spoke and how pretty she was. Mama had thick, dark brown hair, and she always kept it styled and lovely. No small feat for a 50s farm wife in rural Louisiana. I always wish I had picked up her elegant accent. She would laugh at me when I'd imitate her speech. And do you know she even had a lady-like laugh? My laugh is so awful it could peel paint. One thing I did adopt from my mother was her love of books. Mama adored reading storybooks, biographies, mysteries. She would check them out of the library a pile at a time. Like my mother, I often turn the pages late into the night. It helps me sleep, just as reading always soothed Mama at night too. Daddy would rather visit with his fellow farmers than poke his nose in a book. He always wished he had a college education, but he had signed up for the army instead. All three of us kids attended college, Sandra for 3 years and Sonny and I for 4. My brother and I both received bachelor's degrees, he in agriculture and I in education. And in no small measure the credit goes to Daddy for gently pushing us toward college and instilling in us the value of learning. Born Barnett Bridges, Daddy Dan changed his name legally to Barney Oldfield Bridges in honor of the race car driver in Pioneer, Barney Ellie Oldfield, who died in 1946 and was the first man to drive a car 60 miles per hour in the 30s when Daddy was coming of age. Apparently there was a saying going around: if you were behind the wheel, zooming around like a speed demon, people had come back for you. Who do you think you are, Bernie Oldfield? Daddy, do you know how silly that is? I would tease him about appropriating his idol's name. He would blush a little, look away, and smile. But secretly, he probably daydreamed about taking the corners at Daytona with a gleaming, sawed-up Fiat or Blitzen Benz, just as his hero namesake did. He always had new cars, and Daddy loved to drive. He grabbed about he bragged about never having had a wreck, and got such a kick out of telling stories about how his family, Mama Sandra, Sonny, and me, wreaked havoc on the community by being let loose on the streets. When I play cards with my grandson Preston, who is obsessed with anything motorized, I like to think that boy got his zeal for automobiles from his great grandfather, Barney O. Bridges. He attended the Methodist church every Sunday. Mama and us kids would, that is. She had been raised on the Church of England, and she commented once that Method, Method, Methodist church was the closest to the tradition she had grown up in, though now I can see they were not very close at all. Daddy would come with us once in a while, but he had some issues with churchy people. That's not to say he didn't believe. I would catch glimpses of him lying crosswise across the bed, reading his Bible that was falling apart because it was studied so often. He knew that book. When spiritual gifts were being passed out, my daddy got discernment. He had an uncanny ability of knowing the true person inside anyone he was dealing with. This built-in radar in my father's soul meant he could make accurate predictions about person's character and those what life would probably have in store for him. One day I dated did not One boy I dated did not meet with daddy's approval. You watch Lynne, he said gravely. That boy's going to run around on his wife someday. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Of another boy, daddy predicted correctly that someday he would turn out to be fleckless and live off his parents. Jamie Lynn seems to have inher- inherited this gift of shrewdness from her grandpa. She has always been especially good at sizing people up fast, almost instantly, either taking